that we'll go through, and we can talk about, what you think went well. We've been through this before. So I'll just kind of let you start, and then I'll just kind of build off what you feel.
Okay.
So what were some of the successes of the lesson? 95% figurative language, all of it.
I thought the 95% piece, the most successful part of that was having them come up to the board and identify the vowel R syllables, because it got them to interact with the material and allowed me to see firsthand who understood the syllable type and who might need some more help, and small group instruction for that. I also liked how they came in to start the class, and I gave them one direction to do the top part of the 95% sheet, and that allowed them to get started and figure out, okay, this is what we're working on to start the class.
Yeah. I think totally with what you said. It's just they know there's an expectation when they start class. They sit down, there's going to be something for them to do. And then especially with calling students up to come to the board, like you said, you can totally tell that they know that they could be called on at any time. It's not if they're just raising their hand. And I think that's a great strength of your management and engagement piece. So, so I would agree with that. What else do you think went well?
As far as the overall lesson with the standard, I thought they did a good job of remembering, recalling from the day before when we reviewed the figurative language terms. So as we discussed as a whole class, they identified it and were able to tell me, oh, an idiom is this, a metaphor is that. I also thought with the review and the whole class review that they did a good job of staying focused on what it is I was trying to get them to do, and the explanations I thought went pretty well for most of the kids, and they weren't just telling me, oh, this is the definition. They're actually explaining what the figurative language phrase meant instead of just a definition.
Right. Good. Okay. So how would you change the lesson for future instruction? Is there anything that you think could have been tweaked a little bit to make it better?
Yeah, I think I would have taken out one of the 95% material pieces there at the beginning of the class, just because it took longer than I expected. And it also, the sheet that I had to do, I didn't realize every word on the top part of the sheet had vowel R except for 2.
Okay.
So I had them circle the words that contain vowel R. And I looked back as I handed out, I was like, oh, a lot of
That's
these
a lot
happened.
of it, yeah.
So
Okay.
I would have cut that part out. It would have saved us a little bit more time. And also towards the end, I cut them short on timing as well with the post-test. Whereas I should have done maybe standard review first. So maybe flip-flop 95% and
Okay.
the standard. That way they could have finished the test.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would have gone to the 95% as an
Right.
exit ticket instead of the bell work.
Right. And I think, it's kind of hard because, like you said, I think you do your bell work with 95% every day. So that's just the structure that you're used to. But I think that would be a good, thing to think about next time is for the bell work, maybe shorten it up a little bit just with the test. It's kind of tricky. If they run out of time, then we're at a dead end there.
Yes.
So. Okay. So I think, pacing is definitely one thing. As far as the lesson went, though, with the amount of time that you reviewed and the amount of time that you did spend on bell work and then coming up to the board, I was watching the clock and I felt like it was a good pace. It wasn't like, oh, we're spending too much time on this. And, that 95% review, you could tell that some of the kiddos did need your help. Like, they were asking questions like, wait, what's a vowel R? And, so I don't know. I think you're right, and it would just be a continuation in the future. You still stick with vowel R. It's not like you're a one and done day.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that's a good idea with giving them more time for the test. So another thing that we need to think about is important theories that were evident in your classroom organization. So like thinking about grouping and motivation and instruction. And to kind of start this conversation, I would say, technology is a big piece. So what do you think went well with the technology? I know you had already said having them come up and interact with the smart board. Is that something that they do every day, or for bell work, are they mostly in their seats then we go into the lesson for the standard.
Yeah, majority of the days they're in their seat and they do it on paper or on the Chromebook, and then they hand it in, then I assess that later.
Okay.
There is 1 or 2 times a week where I will have them come to the board because I feel like there's several kids that aren't understanding the syllable type, so then that gives me an idea, okay, here's my grouping of kids that are struggling with this concept, and here are the kids that I can have move on to something else and maybe differentiate the bell work from there.
Okay.
Or hey, these kids, you grab these sheets, the rest of you move to the front of the class, we're gonna go over this really quick, and then move on.
And you usually do that for bell work sometimes?
For bell work, yeah. I will try to, just to change it up. It's not an everyday thing, but maybe once a week
Yeah.
type of deal.
I like that. I think
Quick
that's
assessment.
really powerful, so. Okay, I think we're good with that. So how is instruction differentiated to meet the needs of students? I know, as I was taking notes of the observation, one thing that I noticed, and you can agree or disagree, is that even though a lot of the lesson was whole group, I think where I really saw the differentiation was when a student would raise their hand and you go have a one-on-one conversation. You explain something in more detail. Like Aliana, I think, was sitting back there and she's like, well, wait, I don't remember what this is. So then you would explain what a simile is. And that's where I really saw a lot of the differentiation. So it can look different, I think, and depending on the lesson, but that's just one idea that I was like, oh yeah, I think he's doing well with this area. So how else do you think? Or do you agree? Or
Yeah, I do. I try to, with that class, there's some behavioral issues, and some of those students, if you pay more attention with small groups or you give too much time for them to work on their own, that's when the class gets off track. So my differentiation is walking around and having those one-on-one conversations rather than, hey, you know what, I'm going to pull this group, the rest of you, here's the work that I need you to do, directions are on the board, because you set those kids free, and that's when they get off task, which then takes my attention away from the small group to deal with the classroom management. So,
right.
But there are days, like I said, where I'll have some kids at the front of the classroom, but I can still see everybody, so it's not, and they don't understand the concept of why they're at the front, because it's only a few minutes, and it's not like, oh, I'm here because I'm dumb, or they don't start labeling themselves that way.
Right. Cool. So what assessment information was gathered as part of the lesson?
The assessments I gathered were the 95% sheets that they turned in, and then also the standard 4 figurative language post-test that they handed in for a grade, as well as for me for data team meetings.
Okay. And on the post-test, I didn't get to look very closely. So you had given them the definition or no?
Yes.
Okay, so I know you guys had reviewed it, but I didn't know if on the actual test the definition was given as well. So they were given the definition, and then was it a passage or just different sentences where they had to tell you what type?
It was a passage. There was 2 paragraphs, and then it asked them to identify the simile, and then it gave a hint. Simile means a comparison between 2 things using like as with then, and then below that said, what does the above simile mean? So I had them explain that, as well as metaphor, idiom, hyperbole, and personification.
Perfect. So did you get a chance to look at their results yet?
I looked at a few of them, and like I said, I cut them short on the time. But the ones that they did complete, majority of them seemed to grasp the concept of here's the idiom, but they did struggle with the explanation of what does that simile mean, what does that metaphor mean.
But I did notice you did a good job when you were giving the directions before the test. You made it clear, like, okay, I'm giving you the definition. I don't want you to tell me what it means. You need to interpret the author's words. So I think that was great for you as far as giving the expectation so they didn't mess up with that part. So that was great. Okay, so then we need to, how was technology integrated into the lesson? I mean, obviously, Smartboard.
Smartboard for the 95%, and then I also use Google Forms for the post-test.
Perfect. So suggestions that made for future instruction, I think we kind of talked about that with when we were talking about the strengths. Definitely the pacing. I think that was the biggest thing. But I mean, as far as the management and the culture in the classroom, I don't think it could get much better. Like you said, you have some behavior concerns, but if I were a random teacher and didn't know those students coming into that room, I would never know that. So I think there's a very, very comfortable climate in there. The students aren't afraid to talk to you, ask questions, and they know the expectations that we're here to work, we're here to learn, and I think with that as your foundation, I think you have a lot of options as to what you can do. So I think it's awesome that you're able to, do those small group interventions, because not all the classrooms can do that in this building. So yeah, I think just for future, to make it a little bit better, I mean, you might research different ways to continue the use of figurative language. I know with literature circles, we have one of the roles, they could be finding figurative language in the text that they read. So I don't know kind of your next steps with data team cycle and all that, but just think about what text you can use that would have examples of figurative language, and we can definitely collaborate and work together on finding things. So.
Sounds good. That's a great idea.
All right. Do you have any other questions? Anything that I can do for you?
Not now.
All right. Good deal. Sweet.
All right.
Now let's pray that it actually worked.